Hey, so I've got the Play Plus with me right now, and this has been an interesting little machine. Like, I've only had it for 2 weeks, and really it's me just going through all the functions and all the new synth engines and really just learning how it works and how to best make some tutorial content here to really show off what this is capable of. But as a music machine, I'm really enjoying it, and hopefully soon I'll start making some content for it. But something I am really comfortable with is the Polyend tracker. And really, like, I come into trackers from more of a synthesizer background, so like chip tunes and all that. We have sound engines and we can manipulate on that device. So it's been a feature I really wanted on this machine for a while, and there's been a lot of talk because they've got synth engines. This could have synth engines, and yeah, let's have a bit of a talk about it, because there are a couple of nice little features on the original tracker that we can manipulate and use to create synthesizers. So I thought, let's use this as a bit of the architecture on how to create the sound engines on here and replicate them on the original Polyend tracker. So let's get into it. Alright, we're here with the OG Polyend tracker and the new Play Plus, just because the OG tracker little chip inside here, while it can run the sample engine, might not be able to run these new synth engines, but that does not mean it has the power to make some really cool synth sounds. So this one here does require a download, so I'm going to put a link up here as well as down below, and this is to my oscillator pack. So I've gone through and captured a whole bunch of oscillators from all my analog machines, as well as created some own and converted them into wavetables, because oscillators are the core of any sort of synth sound, and with the Polyend tracker we've got some filters and some ways to manipulate it, and we can create some really powerful synthesizers. Now I will say there is a paid version, but I wanted to make this for everyone, because everyone should have synth sounds on their tracker. So there is a free version, and we're going to use that today to make some synth sounds to replicate these synth engines. And why would we go about doing this? Now I'm just going to start making a new sound, and really what I've done is, if you go into the sample pack, there's instruments already set up, so they've already got all the basics set up here, and I'm just going to come down quite a far, and we'll start there. Just pull in the analog sound. They're a little bit expensive, but with that expense comes some really nice features, because if we jump over into the sample playback, they're all set up with wavetables, and if I play this sound, we got a bit of pulse wave modulation. But we can go through and say we can do something like that. But what actually happens if we just go to this wave position and we just turn off this LFO? It sounds very static, and just introducing some tiny little bit amount of modulation, we'll come back in, just makes it sound a little bit more lively, and we can use that as a basis for all our oscillator types. Now, starting with a saw wave sort of segues into the acid sound, because with an acid synth, you probably have a square wave or a saw wave, you have a really squelchy filter, and then you have some way to modulating that, so basic envelope, and they're really typically basic machines. So let's take this saw wave and let's make it a little bit more of an acid sound. And I will say, like, the filter on the Polyend tracker is probably more of an organic one, I would say. It's not very squelchy, but every filter has a really nice sweet spot. So that we're going to find that by just bumping up the resonance right up to the top. So somewhere, I want to capture that range there, because I think that's where a good little bit of squelch is. So what I can do is come back into the instrument parameters. I'm going to control the cutoff, go to the envelope, and we are going to create a very AD envelope. So we don't need the sustain or the release. We're just focusing on these two. And what's happening, because it sounds like it's ramping down like that, just because of that range. So I think it was about 25%, so 50 to 70. So I'm just going to set this down to 20. And we can probably bump the release up to the same amount. So it doesn't matter if I like just tap it and release, we can get a different sound. We can put a little bit on there, so we can control the velocity kind of through the note delay, and turning it off, we can actually have some control over it. It sounds a little bit flat, so we can sort of get a little bit more grungy by giving it a tiny bit of overdrive. Ooh, now that's a little bit of squelch. And I feel this is perfectly usable. So we've got some squelchy filter, and I'm just going to make a basic pattern. So I'm just going to fill it, use a Euclidean because Euclideans are fun. Constant, yeah, that seems about right. Pro start there, and then we can start bumping some numbers around. So I might bring that up, and then we'll come to the end of the pattern. Then we could probably like. Hell yeah, that actually sounds pretty good. Let's add a kick drum to it. Just got a little bit crazy there, but we can start live playing with it because so it's a little bit more expressive. We've got a saw wave. Say we want to change it to a square wave, we can check that position. So we can have a little bit more control, but with these analog waveforms, like it's not just a saw or a square, it's like all the basic waveforms. So we've got a triangle. This is sort of like a distorted sine, and we have some other bits as well. So really, it's just a platform to start building some really cool machines. But let's have a look at this one because it's an interesting little synth engine. Because when I first looked at it, I was thinking, oh yeah, so it's going to be something similar along these lines. But if we go a little bit under the hood and have a look at the patch, we can see there's a little bit more going on. So we've got like a saw, we've got a square mix, so that's what we've set up here. There's a sub mix as well, which is like adding a sub oscillator. We can control that. There's noise, pulse width modulation, and then we got different ways that we can control it. So there's a little bit more going with that oscillator. So if we wanted to, say, make a sub oscillator, what we could do, because we're in a really good position now, I can come up here, select everything, copy, and we'll just paste that in. Shift insert to go to the top, and then select everything, hold shift. We can drop it down as well. So that means these channels are synced because they're running by the same instrument. If I take off that drum because it's probably a little bit too much, it's probably cutting in a bit too much. So what we can do is we can come into the effect, shift up, and I just want to fill with every note. We are going to add a volume constant, and we'll probably put it somewhere like that. So we can control the volume without controlling the volume of the actual oscillator. And same over here, we can actually choose how subby our sub oscillator is, so we can do something like that. So these are ways we can start layering our instruments up to create some of that tracker workflow. Now, this one does have 6 polyphony. We can do 8 tracks total on here, so we've got to manage how we do our sounds. So I just want to go through some of the other features because it does have a few ways that we can connect up our sound, so we can hook it up to the LFO or do some things like we do have a filter, and there is a variety of filters to pick from on here where we only have the one low pass filter on here to play with, but we can definitely get some squelch out of it. We've got different envelope amounts, so this is sort of like the area that we're mucking around here. We can control the envelope. The amplifier is pretty much this one here. We have a modulation, so that's how we add our LFO as well. So there's a few other features in there that make it really nice, like the re-trigger mode. That would be really handy. But we have voice, so we can add glides in that, but with the tracker workflow we apply our glides in the actual tracker frame. So we have the glide function there, which will create that bend up, and we can choose where we want to put that. So we can get very granular on how we want our synths to work. And then we can apply some macros. So these actually go to the parameter knobs that are sort of just sitting outside the screen here. But that allows us to live play it the same way that we were when. So we can have a little bit of fun just mucking around, and that is a really cool acid synth to put on your tracker. Alright, so now we're up to synth number 2, which is dubbed fat, and this is really for those big fat, super saw, lush, big sounds that we can get from those analog machines. Like, really, this is another subtractive synthesizer, so it should be similar setup. So I'm just going to load in another oscillator, but what I might do is just go with the standard shape. So this is just another grouping of wavetables to create some like lush sound. So I'm just going to add that one in. Just wait for it to load, and if we go to the sample play, we can scrub through, and it's just a bunch of like interesting shapes that we can use for our sound. So I just want that saw wave. So with the basics all set up, what makes fat special? Like the acid box is really focused on that sort of squelchy sound. This one is focused on like those sort of big lush super saws and big analog sounds of yesteryears where they used to mash a whole bunch of oscillators together and detune them to create a really interesting sound. But we have 8 tracks here, and let's say we wanted to create that sort of detune effect. How would we set that up? So live way we can do it is we can come in here, add the same note, but we'll come over to the effects and we want to use the micro tune. So if we bump this up just a little bit, it doesn't have to be too much. It doesn't sound like it's out of tune yet, but if we play these together, we have that really cool detune effect. And like we can really take it crazy territory, but what I want to do is I'm just going to keep it there and then come over here and we can do the same thing again. We can add another one and then we keep a nice ratio as well. So I'm going to make this 24. So they're multiples of 12, and if we play that together, ooh, we are getting into some spicy territory. But we don't have to focus on the detune being like multiples of a number. We can create ratios as well. So like another cool thing is if we come into here, I'll make this one 30% and then I'll make this one 50%. So this is like a interesting ratio. So I've got this rhythmic element that's happening with the wobbles, and this is something I really listen out for when I'm doing like my tracker stuff. Alright, so I've done a bit of work by making a bit of a melody line, adding a bit of glide, because this is a really cool effect to add that big sound. And like if you've got space, like right now I've like sort of taken up when I added that glide, but you can do some panning as well. So you got like the sound happening from the center and the two sides, which sounds amazing, and it creates these really cool, interesting things. But if we were to look at it from a global perspective, we've used 3 of the 8 sounds, which is a little bit expensive. So if we were wanting to use this somewhere else and it's probably a little bit too big, what we can do is, I'm just going to copy a short version. So what we can do is we hold shift and select the area that we want to copy. And then what we can do is go more, and then we can go render selection. Now just make sure that you give it an appropriate name so you know this is a really cool super saw. But if we go render and load, it takes a bit. And then if we come into here, there's the sound. If we preview that, we have that super saw saved as a oscillator. And then we can start doing the things like we bring filters on top and we can start sculpting the sound that way. So it's just a nice way to, if we're running out of space and we need to like this sort of sound, we can bring it across and make something really special. So we can make something that fits in 1 track and giving us 7 tracks to work with. Now with the fat sound itself, if I just go back and look under the hood, like there's a few features like that fatness was how we did that detune. Brightness is sort of like gets a little bit of a bump. The timbre, we can sort of shape it a little bit. Then we got noise. We got the same thing like a filter, like this is another low pass filter, so subtractive synthesis. We can do that by going into the instrument parameters and making sure that we have low pass set. So we can play with it that way. We've got LFO, so we can do that. Same thing again, we've got the amplifier volume here. We got the texting release, we got a filter envelope, which we haven't really played with, but we can add that, do stuff like that. We have the LFO as well, so we can do, say if we wanted to make something really clubbish, we can bring that and do, hell yeah. And yeah, just a bunch of different areas that we can work with, and we can apply macros onto this machine as well. So this gives us a really nice way to add those super saw sounds. Alright, so now we're up to VAT, which is their virtual analog synthesizer, which is still really cool. It's another subtractive synthesizer, but it has two oscillators that we can play with. It's got pulse width modulation. It's actually got a lot of modulation options, but it's a really cool sound to actually make some of those sort of like 80s sound. And like I kind of did in this track, make a few bits of those sounds. So in this one, I thought let's deal with how we can set up something that's like a bit more of that pulse width modulation. So I'm just going to go back into my instruments and I will select, I'll pick the analog one again because that's got a wider square wave with the pulse width on it. So I'm just going to bring that down and I'm just going to add it there. And when I talk about pulse width, it's more creating that sort of movement between there and there. So what I can do is I'm going to set it to 0, and I think I had it so this was about, yeah, position 50, but I think that's 25% of the sound. So what I can do is if I come into the instrument parameters and come to that wavetable position, I can bump that up to 25, and that's going to be 25% over 8 steps. So if I come back in here, it's probably a little bit too much and a little bit too far. So this is where we can dial it in and probably make it a little bit wider, so maybe. Also, when you're dialing in some sort of pulse width, it's going to add and take away from the sound. So if I start from here, see how it's flat for like half the time before it gets to that position? You sort of want it in the center position where it's not going to hit both sides. So I'm just going to drop that down to 15 again and then bump it around till it sort of sounds right. It's almost perfect, so I might just drop it down a little bit more. There we go, we got a nice pulse width sound going on, and this will always stay synced to the song. So it doesn't matter what you do whatever part, when you hit that play button, this is always going to cycle in that way. So if I was just to put in a basic sort of sound, so start there, probably come down, maybe go up again. It's going to follow that sort of arc. There's nothing to like re-trigger it from a single point. And yeah, that's a really nice way to do a pulse wave, but it's two oscillators. So how do we set something like that up? Same thing again, we copy and paste it. And say we want to do like an octave jump up, like we don't have to stick with that. We can actually tune this. So if we want to make it go 5 steps up, we can just get some really nice power chords going. Actually, I've dropped it. And say we want to actually change that position as well, like we don't want to have that pulse width modulation, we want to have like a saw on top. We can change the instrument itself. So if I was just to use the fat sound that we use, so it's just with a saw wave on top. So there is another neat little trick here. Because we are dealing with a wavetable and a wavetable itself can move around wherever it wants, we can sort of bump that position of where the wavetable is. So what I can do, I'm just going to use the fill tool, make sure I've got the note selected, so I'm only changing the note, and it's this position here. So position allows us to change where that start point is. I'm just going to make it constant and just leave it at 50. So we've got a different sound that we're picking from that, but if we play both of them together. So what we've done is we've got the original pulse width, and then we've just selected another part of that wavetable that this one's playing alongside, and create some really interesting sounds. And like I did before with switching the instrument, we can set a bunch of these up and then we can layer them on top of each other to create some really interesting sounds. So this one is pretty much done. But let's have a look at the VAP itself. So we can go under here and we'll have a look under the hood. And like we were doing, we were mixing between two different samples. We can control the volume by doing volume command. We have our two different shapes that we can play with, so that's what we're doing there. We can change the tuning like I did with that big power chord, so there's some really nice stuff that we can do. With the filter, we do have a bunch of different filters, but we do have a low pass, a high pass, and a band pass here, so we can actually do some different sounds, so a little bit more sculpting, which is really nice. So we have our amp envelope, so if we go into here, go up, so that's that one. We have a couple of different envelopes as well. So what's really powerful about this synthesizer is it actually has a mod matrix, so there's a couple of different LFOs that we can do. Similar to how the Polyend tracker works, each part of the instrument parameters has an envelope and an LFO that we can work with. So it's really cool, but we do have this mod matrix here, and that's really powerful to this sort of sound. But we do have ways that we can mimic that sort of lush pad sound on this machine. And like one thing I didn't show as well, which what I might do is just switch that. We'll just stop that, select that, delete that. And what we can do is we can add some reverb to this that's just going to make it sound like a big lush pad sound. So what we can do is I'm just going to fill it through the editor. So I'm just going to come down here and there should be a reverb and delay. And there's the delay, there's reverb. So we can add some reverb and so we can create some really lush sounds like that. And really that's pretty much it with this one. Okay, so we're up to the last synth engine, which is a Wavetable FM, which I really personally enjoy because I like the old school game consoles with 2-pole FM, and they recreate a really nice sound that we can play with. And if you ever looked up FM, it's like a bunch of sine waves that sort of feed back on itself to create some really interesting sounds, and something that is quite powerful, and with Wavetable in the name we can mimic it on here. So if I just go back to the sample loader, I've created a whole bunch of wavetables by taking it into Vital and then creating some really nice harmonious frequencies and then providing the feedback. So if I just load one of these up, we'll try this one. So we'll just load this up so you can see what's going on. Alright, so how does FM actually work? So we can use this to sort of visualize it, because what you can see right now is the carrier wave. This is the one that makes sound, but we have this modulator wave that's in the background manipulating the sound to create FM sound. So it's modulating the frequency to like bend and warp it. So if we scroll through, we can start seeing this waveform start turning on itself and creating some different harmonics and creating some real interest there. So when we convert it into a wavetable, what we're doing is capturing one of those spectrums where we crank up the sound on a linear scale, and then this scale here we can actually modulate. So if I bring it all the way back down to the start, we have that FM sound, and that's really just by modulating this area here. And before we were just using LFOs to give that wavetable a little bit of a wiggle to make it sound a lot more organic, but here we're actually modulating it through an envelope, so we're scaling it up and bringing it down. So we could do things like do that sort of sound, we can make it really long for some pad sounds, or if we want that sort of synth bass where it's like really plucky and hard, that's really cool too. But this is only in one direction because this number here adds, so it adds to the top of this, so it's always going to go this direction here. But what happens if you want to start up here and then make it come down? Like really it's just going to smash into the end. And this is a sneaky little trick to make these sort of FM sounds work. And really when you need to do it, what you can do is come into the sample editor, so we see the full waveform, we've got everything selected, and then we can just reverse this because there's a little bit of math behind wavetables, but it's always a divisible of some square root numbers, so 1024. All the frames are going to be the same, so when you reverse the sample, you're just literally just copy and pasting everything so it's back to front. So if we come back into the sample playback, we'll just give it a bit of time. We can see if we scroll through the positions, it's really high at the start and then it's low at the bottom. So if we were to play that again, I might play with that sound. Let's see what I can make. Alright, so that was a lot of fun, but let's have a bit of a look under the hood. So as we were explaining with wavetables themselves, they are this sort of like round sound that we create carrier waves and we start modulating it. So we've got our different ratios here. So like I said before, we have different ratios that we can set up here and we can program them in, and they are stepped as well, which is a really nice feature for any sort of FM sound, because if you start dialing in weird frequencies, it's just going to sound like farts. So we'll just stick to that. We have our shape as well, so we can actually bend between it. So this is probably the wavetable section where it's got different sounds that we can create different sounds. We have different ways to smooth it. The feedback system, so when we saw that it was burning in on itself, that's what's going on there. We're creating a system that sort of makes it a lot more buzzy and brighter. Another thing too is we have a nice filter that can go on top. So similar to all these sounds, FM's really nice when you have some way to sort of make it really buzzy and then bring it back down with a filter, so it's a really nice feature. We can do the same thing here because we have our filters as well. Same thing with the amp envelope, we have a way to do that. We have a couple of different envelopes, so this is more creating those modulations, but that's how we're controlling it through the wavetable position. And we have LFOs that we can set up as well, so if we want to make if you make them go too fast, they sound a little weird. So we can have a lot of fun just with like having wavetables of FM going, and really we have a modulation matrix as well, which is just making it very handy to sort of route the sounds in the system, and we'll have those sort of glide and other settings which we can do through the tracker workflow. So I hope that's given you a bit of an idea of how we can do FM on the tracker. Alright, we've gone through all the synth engines on the Polyend Play, but I think there's a sneaky number 5 in here, and something that's really fun to do, and that's making a chiptune instrument. And this is where I came from with making music. So I created a FM table that's more in line with some of those sort of chiptune sounds of the past, really focusing on like the NES, because how they did their square waves was a bit different. It's not like a pulse width modulation, it's called duty cycle. And if I just load the 8-bit instrument in, it's probably going to look a bit weird because I've already bit crushed it beforehand, so it shouldn't have as much data with it. But these are actually square waves. I don't know why it's showing it this way, but you can see from the top and just think of it as a square wave. But with a duty cycle, what it is it's different positions of a square wave. So you usually have like a 75% square wave, 50% square wave, which is nice and fat, 25, so you can flip between the 75 and the 25, and 12.5, which is like really bitey and juicy. And these are very particular sounds that we can get with our chiptune. So how can we make it so we get some of that sort of duty cycle workflow? So there's two ways I like to do it. We can create like sort of a duty cycle ARP sound. So if I go into the sample instrument parameters, got the wavetable, I'm just going to set it to square. So square is going to go from 1 to 2, and I'm just going to raise that number up a little bit. And what we're going to do is just dial it in so it's sort of sitting on very chiptune sound right now. If you want to make it a little bit more chiptune and gut it a little bit more, you can bit crush it a little bit more. And this is one way to do the sound, but another way is usually you would have the duty cycle pulse at the start and then continue on with the normal sound as well. So just go back into here, and I'm just going to put an envelope on and bring that down, bring all that stuff down, just do that, and we'll dial that down. And what we're going to do is just move it back a little bit. So what I might do is just create like a little melody using the fill tool because it's always fun. I'm just going to select a Euclidean, 12 notes, and we'll just create a random range between those two and see what it comes up with. So we can add some bass notes in, so do something like and then we can do some sort of ARP sound as well, so we can bring up a really high note, and we'll just give it the ARP command as well. And then with the ARP command, we do need that second one to be the chord. And then with the ARP command like this, I usually just copy and paste it around till I've got the right flavor I want. And that is just some basic sort of chip sound that you can muck around with, and I feel it could fit really well because they are quite cheap to run, these ones, but really, as you probably notice, is filling up the sample memory a lot, especially on the original tracker. But I have made a full song already in this project file, so it's not like having these is going to be expensive. What you can do is create instruments that you can play with, and then you can have samples in the background to work with. So this is just a really nice way to add some synthesizers on your original tracker. So I hope you found some useful insight and something to inspire you to try some stuff, because the Polyend tracker, when it first came out, there's been a lot of insight and programming and just some work put into that firmware that we can do some really cool things and really push that sound engine to do what we want. And oscillators has been one of those big things I want on there, because from the start, like I said, I do come into trackers from chiptunes. We do have sound engines that we work with, so being able to have those sort of synthesizer sounds ready to go on the tracker would be something really fun for me to start working, and it's been in a lot of my songs recently. So if you haven't yet, definitely get that sample pack, put it on there, even if it's a free one, and you'll be just opening yourself up to add a lot more content to your tracker itself. And yeah, on the end, like I definitely want to start talking more about this one. Like I'm definitely going to build a how-to series on how to get from where to go with the Polyend Play, because there's a lot of features in here, and I think there was a nice little walkthrough on how to go through from zero to like a full song. Definitely think this deserves something like that. So in the end, I hope you found this one useful and you do get some really nice tracker content out of it. And if you did like this one, definitely give it that thumbs up, because it does tell the algorithm to point it to other people that are probably looking to expand on their tracker sound and how they can make more of it. And if you do have any comments or queries, because I did cover quite a lot in this video, please feel free to leave them down in the comments below. If you got any sound engines that you want to sort of replicate and you can't figure out, feel free to chat, because I'm always here talking to people. And if you did enjoy this one, I do have a lot of Polyend tracker content on my channel, so if you're looking for some more information or inspiration, I look forward to seeing you next time.